It might not look like progress, but it is progress. By the end of the video, the engine bay will be cleared of any unnecessary bits and pieces, and I'll be able to start positioning the engine properly, ready for mounting. But first, I need to do some shopping. Since my JB Weld fix didn't work out as I'd hoped, I needed to source a replacement gearbox pretty fast. It's unlikely that I would have been able to easily position the gearbox mounts whilst the tabs they attach to were in several pieces, so I looked online for a replacement unit. Turns out these things aren't going as cheaply as I'd initially thought. In some cases, breakers on eBay were asking in the ballpark of £200 for one. I decided not to go that route and pull one myself from my local breakers for £60 instead. I'm told that the OTJ 5-speed is one of the most commonly found gearboxes in VAG cars of this time period, and I could have pulled a replacement from anything from a Seat Leon to a VW Golf or an Audi A3 of the same era. It just so happens that I managed to stumble upon a front-wheel drive Audi TT Roadster with the exact same engine code as mine back in the shed, and crucially, the same 5-speed manual box that I needed. All I needed to do was spend the entire morning prying it from the TT's engine bay with nothing but a basic socket set and a crowbar. So, the gearbox itself. It's exactly the same as the other one, just not broken as far as I know. Everything rotates properly and there's no visible damage. The shift tower is junk, but the one from the other box still works, so I'll just swap that over when the time comes. The inner CV cups are still attached because I brought the wrong triple square spline sockets, and I couldn't get them off, so I liberated the shafts from the hubs and yanked them out of the box, CV boot and all. Yeah, this gearbox removal wasn't graceful. Right, so all that apparent progress from the last part, time to undo it. Initial test fitting identified one or two snags that needed sorting before the powertrain would go where I'd like it to, so the engine comes out again so I can get better access to the bay. Since I fluffed up the recording when I removed the CG10 and dropped this in place, you now get to see me finesse the iron-blocked 1.8 turbo from Noddy's toy car. As you can see, the assembly is too wide to come up straight, so with the help of a load leveler, I'm able to slide it out at an angle and eventually slips out nicely between the headlights. I think that realistically this engine ought to be installed and removed from underneath. I think this is achievable if I can make the front cross member removable. There's a nice rust hole on the passenger side, so something's getting cut either way. It made sense to put the engine back on the stand for now. I first removed the gearbox so that I could reattach the mounting plate for the stand. Most of the footage here is of me sampling each socket in my set because either I'm blind or every bolt head is a different size. Moving on. If you think that the engine looks unbalanced there, that's because it is. It's fine whilst upright, but I wouldn't rotate it without support. On the stand I can get a good look at the wastegate actuator, the one part that's stopping me from moving the engine back the few centimetres I need it to. Having spoken to a friend about it, possible options include relocating the actuator body, using a bent or joggled rod to connect it to the wastegate arm. I could also remove the arm, reattach it 180 degrees and have the actuator body on the other side. I'll lie in bed for several hours in the dark thinking about it, then I'll come back to this later. With the engine out of the bay and back in the corner, I can finally get on with stripping the parts I won't be needing with the new engine in place. Starting with the gear lever and selector rod, which I can't do yet because what's left of the exhaust downpipe and catalytic converter are in the way. To get better access to the exhaust bolts, I first removed the outer heat shield from the catalytic converter, which went a lot easier than I could have ever hoped. I'm sure that like me at the time, you're thinking this marks the start of a trouble-free removal process that will only take a few minutes. Well, there's a saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And I'd run out of the penetrating fluid that would have given me at least a fighting chance of getting these fasteners off, so I had no choice but to go in dry. When the half-inch ratchet failed, out come the breaker bar. The exhaust is on hangers at either end, so it didn't matter how much I cranked it, the whole thing would just twist. My admittedly lame attempt at supporting it from underneath didn't help much either, so out came the heat. And when that didn't work, I just did what I should have led with. Just need to carefully unhook these rubber exhaust hangers now, and this part of the exhaust is finally free. The rest of the midsection and the back box isn't in the way and therefore a problem for future me. Now we can get to the gear selector rod, after I've removed this inner heat shield. 5 10mm bolts hold this in place, including a centre bolt that connects the front and rear portions of the shield together. These bolts are a bit stiff, so I have to be really careful I don't snap the heads off any. With all said and done, the lineup consists of the 4 deceitful bolts that held the outer heat shield to the catalytic converter, 2 of the bolts that secured the inner shield, and 2 snapped heads. Honourable mention to the 5th bolt that refused to come out entirely and no longer exists in its previous state of matter. Now we have good access to the gear selector rod. It's held in place by a rubber bushing and a single bolt at the back. That dangling spring is the reason why the shifter on most Micras won't return back to centre properly. The other end is supposed to connect to the stabiliser bar, but at some point it snapped, like it does on all of them. As it happened, I didn't need to remove this centre bolt. Removing those 2 nuts that flank the rubber bushing, like you can see behind my hairy forearm here, allows the entire thing to drop down. Then the gear stick simply pulls through the rubber boot. Next on the hit list is the throttle cable. The 1.8 has a drive-by-wire throttle, so this won't be needed. The cable is pulled from this retainer bracket and the bolt holding it on is removed 60 degrees at a time. Inside the footwell, this bracket securing the cable to the bulkhead is removed. And the steel cable with its rubber grommet pops off the top of the pedal. I did my best to film this, but space was tight and I kept knocking the camera, so...
You know what, you're just going to have to take my word for it. Those 2 bolts came out, and then the cable just pulls through.
Out comes the throttle cable, so now let's move on to the clutch. The gearbox I'm using uses a hydraulic system for the clutch instead of a cable, so the clutch cable comes out too. In order to get better access, here I'm removing the tray under the steering wheel, and now it's time for my gimbal to start acting up again.
I don't know what that's doing. What on earth? What's it doing? Why is it doing that?
I have no idea. I know nothing about camera equipment.
Okay, let's... Hold on.
Pulling the shelf out reveals this mystery box that I don't remember installing, but definitely looks like it was put there after the fact.
I don't know what that is.
Unlike with the throttle cable, the point at which the clutch cable connects to the end of this pedal is almost completely obscured visually with the dashboard in place. Why don't I remove the dashboard now, since it comes out eventually anyway, you ask? The cable hooks over the pedal, so it can come out by feel. My assistant for the day actually unhooked the cable, not me. Got to give credit where it's due. Now this bulkhead pass-through can be detached with a little leverage, and that's one less thing in the engine bay. And now for the part I was dreading the most, the brake booster and master cylinder. After some deliberation and having spoken with the owner of the only other Micra that I know of to have had this swap done, I decided that optimal positioning of the engine outweighed the less than optimal prospect of a heavier brake pedal. Time will tell if this was the right call, but I think it's important to remember that vacuum assisted brakes don't really make you stop faster. They're there to make the pedal feel easier to press for everyday driving. Oh. Dry. This master cylinder has 4 pipes running to it. Once I loosened off the fittings for each and unplugged the level sensor, I could denut the master cylinder from the brake booster and remove it. I made sure to clean up any brake fluid because we all know what that does to paint. Back inside the footwell again, we can get a good look at the 4 nuts that hold the back of the booster to the bulkhead. There's also the clevis fastener that connects the pedal to the pushrod. On the brake pedal, the pivot point is above the pushrod since it pushes the rod. The clevis pin is secured in place not only by an R-clip, but also a plastic expander at the end of the pin that acts as a fallback in case the clip fails. Pretty neat. It's a ball ache to remove though. For previously discussed reasons, I didn't film the removal of the clevis pin or the 4 nuts that secure the booster to the bulkhead, but owing to the close proximity of the steering column, doing so required my most creative use of extensions and universal joints to date. I already checked to see if the holes for the cylinder line up with the holes in the bulkhead, and they do. Now let's see if the master cylinder fits. Oh, that's going to be a problem. Some thinking needed. I might be able to space this out a small amount depending on available room, or remote mount the reservoir, or try another master cylinder altogether. Anyway, I no longer needed this 12-volt power feed for my, so I can pull this through as well. The engine loom goes straight into the engine ECU that's behind the bulkhead, so I'll leave that in place for now, but eventually I'll pull it through into the cabin. For now it's tucked out of the way. I've also left the soft fuel lines in place, mostly so I remember which of the pipes are fuel lines and which side is the feed and return. I did remove this clutch cable bracket and hose clamp though. Where it makes sense, I always thread screws and bolts in their original places so that I don't lose them for when it comes time to refit. If I don't plan to refit a part, they might come in useful in case I decide to mount something else there instead. They can also protect the threads during painting. With the Micra's gear selector removed, I wanted to see how the Audi shifter would sit in its place. The long stiff cables made this tricky, but it seems that placing it directly on top of the tunnel instead of poking it through the hole from underneath makes for an ideal driving position. That will save me some room underneath for an appropriately sized exhaust too. So what I'm left with is a car with no gear stick and 3 pedals that don't do anything. It dawned on me at this point that if this project doesn't succeed, then it's destined to become a cube. Not that kind of cube. Taking a closer look at the brake master cylinder, aside from the clearance issues with the bulkhead, a glaring issue is that the piston doesn't support a threaded pushrod and clevis fastener like you might see on aftermarket cylinders designed for use without a booster. Instead, it looks like the booster pushes on the cylinder with this pin on the inside. I'd love to hear advice and recommendations in the comments if you have any experience with this sort of thing, but it seems like my options are either to adapt the master so that it accepts a threaded pushrod, or buy an aftermarket master cylinder with the correct attachment. Because I don't know what brakes I'm going to be running yet, I've taken the executive decision to forget about it until later, but I'll be interested to hear your thoughts regardless. In an earlier video, I mentioned potentially using a P11 Primera radiator to handle the extra heat load this engine is going to pump out. I had one kicking around, so I thought I'd see how it fits. Couldn't have been more perfect if I'd designed it that way. Obviously, it just fitting in the gap neatly isn't the only criteria for success here. The ports need to be in the right position, and I need to be able to mount it securely and remove it easily with everything else in place. Looks cool though. I think that's going to do it for the time being. I have a timeline in my head of how things are going to roll out with the project. Many of them are dependent on time, money and skill, but I'll keep you updated regularly on progress. If you think I'm worthy of a subscription, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and thank you if you do so, or have done already. You can also follow me on Instagram, cg10.uk. I'll try my best to post photos when I actually remember to take them. Hope you have an enjoyable holiday season, and I'll catch you all very soon.